This happened when I was babysitting for an aunt of mine. It was back in the 1980s too, and I guess I wasn't really just babysitting. All of our parents decided that they were going to go out and hit the bars that night. I just happened to be the oldest of the cousins, and I was thus the one left in charge. My aunt lived in a pretty old house out in the country. She worked at a grocery store in town as a manager. The owner of the grocery store had given her the house to live in once he promoted her to manager. It had always been empty and much closer to the store than her normal house, and thus she could spend more time at the store. I always enjoyed that house because it had so many interesting things in it. My aunt was a pack rat, and apparently whomever had lived in the house before her was obviously a pack rat as well, so there were plenty of things in the house to go through. That was good because the house, even though it was closer to her job, was still out in the middle of nowhere, and there wasn't exactly a whole lot to do there when it got dark outside. When it was light outside, you could hike, go across the street into the field, and play baseball, and other things like that. But at night, unless you found going outside and collecting lightning bugs a stimulating activity, there wasn't exactly a whole lot to do. A couple of the children were off playing in the other room. One of them was in the living room at the front of the house, with me close by watching TV. There wasn't cable, and the reception was fuzzy on the 2 or 3 channels we were able to get. I have no idea what we were even watching, but it was my young cousin Sue who was in there watching it with me. Sue had been laying down on the floor, probably due to the floor being cooler, as it was really hot outside. She was one of my aunt's kids, so she was one of the ones that actually lived in the house. For some reason, something suddenly caught her attention, and she shot up. She was looking out the big window towards the front yard and the road. "Someone is out there on the lawn," she told me, rather matter-of-factly. Still, hearing her say that was sort of creepy, and it gave me a little bit of a jolt inside. Getting up, I looked out the front window. Sure enough, there was someone walking through the front yard toward the house. They were far enough back from the porch light that I couldn't make much of their features out right away. The way they were moving was a bit odd, almost like they had been injured or something. I wasn't sure what to do or think at first. I guess that's the thing about babysitters, and something I've always wondered about when I hear stories about teenage babysitters who get into some sort of conflict with an intruder, or something like that. I don't think we're ever really expected to be able to do anything in these sorts of situations because, let's face it, these aren't things that usually come up in the first place. "Go get the boys and make sure the back doors are locked," I instructed Sue. She hesitated for a moment, but then went to do what I had told her. I went over to the front door to lock it. This wasn't an area where people ever worried about locking their doors, but this was already an odd situation, and I couldn't be sure what was going on. I stayed by the door, waiting for the person to get closer. Once they did, I realized it was a young man, probably in his 20s. It looked like he had just been in a big fight or something, although I didn't notice that he was bleeding. "Hello?" he yelled. "Can someone in there help me?" Through the door, I responded to him. "What is it you need help for?" "Can you please let me in?" he responded, obviously not answering my question. "You need to tell me what it is you need help for," I repeated. There was something just off about this whole situation. I couldn't tell exactly what was bothering me, but I wasn't about to let some strange man into a house where I was watching children late at night. Now, there was no doubt in my mind the guy looked like he seriously needed some help. But after I repeated my request, his whole demeanor changed. He began to look like he was panicked, and began sounding even more so. "You have to let me in," he repeated, this time sounding scared. At this point, my younger cousins had come back into the room. I tried to tell them to stay back by holding my hand out. One of the boys had his pellet gun with him, which I may have found amusing in another circumstance. There was still just something about this situation that I didn't like, and I had a feeling that the guy on the porch wasn't really in danger, but meant us some sort of harm. If that was the case, then a pellet gun really wasn't going to be a lot of help. It was then that I noticed a flicker of light coming from the road. The house was set back off the road, with a rather large front yard. That was why we had so much time, as the man had been coming forward through the yard. The flicker that I saw was very obviously someone putting out a cigarette. There was someone standing off at the road still, and I hadn't known how long they were there. "I can't let you in. You really should go," I told the guy. I think he must have seen my eyes dart out to the road, because he glanced back there himself, and that was when he completely changed again. "If you don't let me into this house, he's going to kill me," the man on the porch began screaming. "He's already done this much to me. He's really going to kill me." I began shaking at that point, not exactly sure what I should do. I didn't truly believe that the man on the road was trying to kill this guy. If he had been, why didn't he move forward into the yard at all? Plus, the guy looked like he had been in a fight, but I just couldn't risk the children. Kevin, the boy with the pellet gun, stepped forward into the room. He was the oldest of the kids in the house, other than me at 12 years old. "I called Ted down the road and told him what's going on," he told me. "He said he hopped into his truck and he's on the way already." Ted was this older man who lived alone, not too far from my aunt's house. He was one of those big, rough and tough country boy types who got drunk and into bar fights, but was overall a pretty good guy. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in," I told him. "Plus, for someone who wants to kill you, that guy out there is sure keeping his distance." The man on the porch then switched from panic to anger. He began cursing at me, saying a lot of things I didn't approve of in front of the children. He yelled at the guy on the road to come on over. This, of course, validated what I had been thinking. The guy wasn't trying to kill him. They were working together, up to something. The guy didn't even make it halfway through the yard, however, when I saw lights on the road. He stopped and looked over at them. A truck, sort of like the one they drove in Sanford & Son, began pulling into the driveway. It was Ted's truck. Ted didn't pull all the way up to the house. He stopped and got out of the truck and began yelling something at the guy in the yard. The guy in the yard turned and took off running in the direction he had come from. Ted then walked up to the house. He didn't get anywhere near the house before the guy jumped off the porch and ran off too. Ted yelled some choice things at them as they ran off, and then came up to the house and knocked on the door. I let him in and noticed he was carrying a shotgun with him. He knew who the guys were. He explained that they wouldn't come back, but they were absolutely up to no good. They did a lot of drugs, and more than likely were trying to steal things in order to get drug money. He told us it was a good thing that Kevin had called him. I have to agree. He stayed with us for an hour before he left and went home. It was a bit scary after that, until our parents came home, but the two guys never came back. I live in a small town in a more rural state. There's not exactly a huge economy here. Most of the jobs are retail or fast food. They also don't pay a lot here either, so sometimes it's a bit hard to try and get ahead. I myself worked at a fast food restaurant on the second shift, and I couldn't afford to buy a car, so I had to walk to and from work. It wasn't really that big of a deal to me. It was always about 1 in the morning that I was walking home. Everything was pretty dead at that point, so I was normally the only person out walking. We have a couple of homeless people in the town. In fact, sometimes we seem to have new ones come and go. But there are a few people I've seen around for quite a while, including at least one guy who's been there for at least 5 years. There's a bridge that goes over a set of railroad tracks. I have to cross that bridge when I'm leaving town and heading toward my house. It's sort of where the town ends and the more rural area begins. Well, one night as I was walking home from work, I saw something really weird. There was a guy just standing on the bridge. It was odd to see someone out that late at night, as well as to see someone standing on the bridge at all. He kept leaning over the bridge and looked like he was dropping things off the side of it. Normally, and I don't mean to seem antisocial, but when I see someone out walking, especially at night, I tend to cross the street and give them a wide berth. It's really because, although I live here, I don't know a whole lot of people, and I don't tend to like talking to people that I don't know. For some reason, this particular time, I didn't do this. As I walked closer and closer, I noticed that the guy was dropping little bits of folded paper up off the bridge. Of course, I found this to be really odd, but it wasn't any of my business, so I was just going to move on. Since I didn't cross the street or anything, though, the guy decided to stop me and talk to me. I'm one of those people that can sometimes get stuck in a conversation against their will, so I stopped there and started to chat with him. And the guy was actually a bit interesting, and I enjoyed talking to him, but he was also pretty weird too. I mean, he was writing notes to someone or something that was living under the bridge. Apparently, he told me that months before, another homeless fellow had been under the bridge with him and had beaten him up severely and left him for dead. He had recuperated in a lady friend's house and had just now come back to the town I lived in. The notes he was dropping off the side of the bridge were supposed to be notes to the guy who had beaten him up so many months before. Well, the whole thing was really weird, but I didn't think too much about it. Homeless people could be pretty weird when they wanted to be. One thing he kept on talking about over and over again was confronting the guy who had tortured him. It was like those notes he was dropping off the side of the bridge were meant to lead up to that confrontation. I thought that was kinda dumb, but I didn't quite tell him like that. I told him that it probably didn't seem like a good idea for him to threaten a guy who had already beaten him nearly to death before, but he kept on insisting that he would be fine and would come out of it okay. Well, I did notice the guy several days in a row when I went walking home from work. He was doing this note dropping each time, and it was always him confronting the guy about it. Well, after about a week of that, one time walking home at around 1 a.m., I didn't notice the homeless man at the bridge. I thought it was a little weird, but I didn't give it too much thought at first. However, as I was crossing the bridge, I heard the most hideous wailing coming from underneath it. I mean, it was the most miserable sound I've ever heard in my life. Freaking out, and remembering how the homeless guys did things under that bridge, I called the police on my cell phone. I told them immediately what happened and what I thought. They told me not to go under the bridge under any circumstances. I really wanted to go under there and try and help the guy if it was the homeless guy I'd been talking to. And when I heard another wail, I realized I had to in case he was being murdered or something. I didn't get close to down there before the police showed up, though. They accessed the area from another road. I watched as they drug one guy over to the police car and then threw him in the back, and much later brought a guy from the area and put him into an ambulance. I really didn't know what was going on until I read about it in our paper, and it wasn't just a beating. The homeless man that he had been dropping those notes to beat him to death, which sent several chills down my spine. I mean, first, a man I knew for over a week not only got murdered, but got murdered under a bridge I needed to walk over, and I almost walked in on the murder as well. If the police hadn't beat me there, what may have happened? Some decades ago on a hot summer's day, far from the southern white sandy beaches of my toddler's youth, the black-soiled prairie of the upper Midwest, I remember a seemingly bottomless drainage pond and waterhole for livestock, cattle, pigs, and sheep. It was laden with pesticides and herbicides from the surrounding fields, manure and offal from the on-site slaughterhouse. I was more than once called a witness when delivering the paper out there on my afternoon route, and all of it distilling in the hot summer sun in a marinade of gasoline, diesel fuel, oil, sludge, and various other substances that had eroded their way downhill until it all combined into the rancid black soup we called our swimming hole. It was the only place left that still had water after all the others. Big Creek, Little Creek, High Trestle, etc., had long dried up. Nothing grew there, and nothing apart from the livestock actually lived there either, except us, who spent endless summer days there during the freakishly hot, dry, and drought-like summer months, sometimes even during the winter for snow fort making or ice skating. One day we decided that we were going to build a raft out of 55-gallon drums, boards, bits of wire, rope, and cable, that we either picked up around the surrounding area or found out in town during one of our night raids. We'd lash the boards to the drums and float out into the deepest parts of the pond and jump off, keeping our eyes, nose, and mouths shut, sink as far as we could to the bottom, which averaged about 20 feet of black water with about 4 feet of mud and silt below, and then push off the bottom as best as we could without getting stuck and breach the surface some yards out, then swim back, get on the raft, and do it all again, until we were either too tired to keep going or it was too dark to see. Naturally, all of this was done completely in the raw, because any attempt to wear clothes resulted in dark brown, black, or orange stains that were impossible to bleach out, or so my mother would scream. So too my stepfather, with every stripe of his hated leather belt on our virginal white asses. Personally, I thought it better to not throw them away. We could still use them next time in place of any new ones. That meant that we would all have to bring extra clothes that we would change back into once we were bound for home, but that proved to be pointless, because no one ever remembered to bring the funky ones with them, so we were always back to square one. Of course, what was never mentioned were the dangers of the toxicity of the water and the effect it could or might have on our general health, or worse, our gene pool. Toxic shock was all but unknown during that period, especially in small-town USA. Instead, it was always about the cost of clothes, the smell, or the stains. My younger brother R was always getting into trouble with his because he was too shy to not wear any, so often as not he would get caught in his smelly garb still on when we got home. Even if it was mostly dry by the time we got there, it still stank, and that was enough to get us caught and grounded again. As soon as the grounding was over, however, and depending on how hot the weather had been, we would be right back out there, stripped down, most of us at least, and take our chances in the water hole. There wasn't a lot to do in a small town back then, so you mostly made it up as you went along. One particularly hot summer day, my brother jumped off the raft like usual, about 100 feet offshore when he lost it. He pushed off from the bottom of the surface like usual, but he must have gotten a little too deep in the muck and couldn't get enough air to right himself. Time after time he'd tried to reach the surface, stick his nose under the water like a water rat — we called muskrats water rats — and try to get a snatch of air, only to have the water go down his nose and into his sinuses, blocking off any air reaching his lungs before going down again, trying desperately to find purchase, barely pushing off again towards the surface for even just a little bit of air, but he kept on coming up short. He was drowning and he knew it, and he panicked just like any little kid would. Because most of us were drying off and putting our clothes back on, I was already partly dressed when I heard his garbled screams. Well, there goes my clothes. Instantly I jumped in. I was about 150 feet off the other side of the raft, and swam directly to him, grabbed him, or should I say he grabbed me, and proceeded to be used like a ladder for him to reach the surface, enabling him to stay up just long enough to get some of that life-saving air he desperately needed. As for me, he'd planted me about 3 feet in that thick black muck on the bottom. Reflexively, whenever I would swim, I was always ready to take in a full breath of air at a second's notice, what with some of the roustabout friends we had, always trying to drown each other. And I did just that before he pushed me down deep into the muck. I had the necessary time to dig out each leg and foot from the mud, feel around a bit to make sure my brother wasn't going to do it again, and pushed for the surface. Despite the terror, my brother was smart enough to lunge a little closer to the shore when he climbed me like a siege engine, so I was able to get back into the water and swim to where he had now moved, and use my arm as a kind of dragline for him to latch onto momentarily. I repeated this tactic over and over, pulling my brother back towards the shore just a little bit at a time, until the water was shallow enough to go out and carry him in bodily. Put him on his back, push all the muck out of him, sit him back up to get him to cough out what was left, and thank God we had made it through another near-death experience, largely unscathed. My brother started crying, and when I finally looked up, all of our friends were crying too. Then I started crying. Not because of our parents found out we were going to wish we'd never been born, which my mother reminded me of all too often, or to get beat for trashing our clothes again, but because I was so goddamn glad we had both made it. To hell with the beatings, I thought. To hell with the groundings. We'd made it. My brother cried even harder after that. Miraculously, when we got home, our mother and stepfather weren't there, so no one ever knew. Because our friends knew better than to ever tell anyone anything without the group's permission, for fear of being excommunicated forever, no one ever did. My brother changed after that. What kid wouldn't? But unlike some, he became mean. He became even more daring, but in an extremely angry kind of way. Even cruel with some of the younger kids that would, because of our reputation for adventure, be asked or invited to join our little group. He took it upon himself to be the taskmaster, the tester. He would put them through their paces to prove their worth as a member to him, rather than to all of us. He would push them often too hard, and make them either cry, quit, or worse, tell their parents. We moved shortly after from small-town USA to big city USA, where we both attended high school, and for me, college. There were other incidences over the years that proved to have the same or worsening result. Saving a brother's life again and again just didn't turn out very good for him. Over the years, I tried to talk to him about it, but he just wouldn't say much. And I remember the ancient Chinese/Buddhist proverb, if you save a life, you're responsible for it. Am I? Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. We all are. As for me, I went on being at the right place at the right time, with not only our, but sometimes friends, and even sometimes complete strangers. I mostly never knew what the effect of these incidents had on the survivors or their families, but I like to think there was maybe one good thing that came out of all of this. My brother grew out of his asthma. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. That sort of stuff really helps me out with the audience engagement and really helps my videos get out to a lot more people. So hopefully we can get to that 1 million one day. Help me out, guys. That'd be great. Once again, starting this week on the second channel, we're going to be doing some true crime stuff. Probably twice a week if I feel in the mood for it and feel like doing all the research required. Those will be on Wednesdays/Thursdays and Saturdays/Sundays probably. So look forward to that if you're interested. There's a link to my second channel in the description. The name is Mr. Blue Sky, so keep an eye out for that. If you guys feel like contacting me for any reason, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please make sure that it has proper grammar, and try to include as much detail as possible so it's long enough for me to include in a video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, if it has one, what type of story it is, if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the art used in this video, links to my artist, Alan, will be in the description below. He does a lot of horror art stuff, and he's really good at it. He also does commissions, so if you guys have any projects you want to work on or something, please be sure to check him out. He can probably get you something really good. As usual, links to the music used in the video will be in the description below in the order which it appears. I think that's pretty much all for now, guys, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.